Pomej. The Headless Cyberneticist on K2-18B. Sherlock Holmes, The Galactic Cases, Episode 4. Based on the characters created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A goaudio production. Elmer's regular 100,000-kilometre service is due, sir, First Officer Tornot informed the captain, who was reviewing the expenses from recent flights in his command chair on the bridge before forwarding them to accounting. I know, said Decker without looking up. We're already approaching the service station, but I can't accompany Elmer and you need to handle the Works Council election. Oh, it'll be Dr. Z again anyway. He's been handing out lollies as promotional gifts these past few days. We could delegate the task to our special guests, Tornot suggested, and received an approving nod from his superior. A little while later, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson drifted onto the bridge. In their old-fashioned suits with green brocade ties, they were a human anachronism aboard the ship. Dr. Watson was sucking on a lollipop, but he rewrapped it in the foil paper he was still holding and tucked it into his trouser pocket. You could make yourselves useful, gentlemen, Decker greeted them. Our main robot needs servicing and, according to our safety regulations, requires 2 men as escorts who can carry him if necessary. As if on cue, Elmer appeared in all his 2 meters of steel glory, with his humanoid plastic facial features seemingly already beaming in anticipation. Here I am! Holmes pulled a skeptical face. How much does Elmer weigh then? Oh, barely 200 kilograms, Tornot reassured him. For 2 strong chaps like you and Dr. Watson, he shouldn't pose any problems, but things usually go smoothly, and there's rarely any need to cart him about. Through the front window of the Ultimo 1, a blue planet came into view, which was more than twice the size of Earth. Decker pointed to it and explained, That's K2-18B, a water planet that orbits its central star, a red dwarf, in just 33 days. The service station is located beneath the ocean surface and has a breathable air mixture and pleasant temperatures, so you won't need any equipment. Tornot will take you to the diving sphere, where we can comfortably drop all 3 of you off. Drop-off sounds a bit harsh, remarked Dr. Watson. You're not trying to get rid of us forever, are you? Tornot was trying to be particularly funny once again. Maybe you, but certainly not our good friend Elmer. And Decker added, Don't worry, the diving sphere is robust enough to ensure you have a comfortable entry into the dense atmosphere and ocean. When you arrive at the service station, you'll be greeted by the chief robot Hardwell. You just need to insert this capsule into his nose. Holmes took the round black object, which was as thick as 3 fingers, from Decker's hand with raised eyebrows and put it in his jacket pocket. Most peculiar, but then again, we've grown rather accustomed to oddities from our previous flights. Tornot accompanied the trio in the lift down to the cargo room, where the large diving sphere hung like an oversized golden Christmas bauble on a thick chain. How does one control such an apparatus? Inquired Holmes. Like those newfangled motor cars? Not to worry, Tornot waved off with a casual gesture. Everything's fully automatic. You just need to sit inside, wham, and you'll be as safe as houses. We've never been there either, Dr. Watson remarked, yet willingly climbed into the sphere after Holmes and Elmer, whose round door sealed hermetically, and took a seat in a comfortably padded chair. Through portholes, one could enjoy a panoramic view. After a brief theatrical wave, Tornot withdrew, the cargo bay opened, and the chain rattled downwards with the sphere before detaching itself just at the edge of the planet's atmosphere, whereupon the diving sphere began its sparking descent towards the ocean. That reminds me of the balloon ride with Lord Glastonbury, Holmes recalled. He had one of those flying contraptions built after reading about an 18th century French military balloon. Strong winds carried the balloon and its basket, in which we trembled for our lives, far off course, and we had to undertake quite a trek back. Don't worry, Elmer reassured him. We can't drift off course here. We'll be entering the wet element shortly. A loud splash confirmed Elmer's words, and from then on, the golden sphere glided slowly and steadily, with quiet bubbling into the dark blue depths. soon, a gigantic coral-covered structure came into view. Where none of these colourful, colony-forming Cnidarians had settled, stainless steel components gleamed alongside brightly lit glass facades. No fish or similar marine creatures were to be seen. The sphere sank unerringly into a wide funnel, causing a soft scraping sound before coming to an abrupt halt. The hermetically sealed door opened with a gentle hiss, and Elmer was the first to step out. "Come along," he encouraged Holmes and Dr. Watson to follow him. "The coast is clear." Both stepped into a gloomy corridor where the floor tiles appeared to have been polished to a mirror shine. A metallic voice sounded, "Welcome, follow the light." Beneath them, one floor tile after another lit up, prompting them to set off. "Oh, walkable lighting, how original," Dr. Watson said with delight. Yes, Holmes agreed, "but I would definitely prefer a crystal chandelier." At the end of the corridor, a 5.7 robot was waiting, its round upper body glittering like feldspar. A smile lay upon its square head. It wasn't a friendly smile, as it was on a metal face ill-suited for such expressions, beneath a gaping hole, but it was unmistakably a smile. "My name is Hardwell," he introduced himself, stamping one of his black tubular legs as he did so. "Program, please." At Holmes's puzzled look, Elmer explained, "You need to insert the cartridge now, gentlemen." "Ah, yes," Dr. Watson chimed in. "That black thing Mr. Decker gave you must now go where his nose ought to be." At once, Holmes took the capsule from his jacket pocket and pushed it into the hole of Hardwell's nasal opening, whereupon his glassy eyes lit up red. Skirton the Cyberneticist is responsible for Elmer's 100,000-kilometre service, but he won't be able to complete the task, Hardwell prophesied. "And why not?" asked Holmes impatiently. "The Cyberneticist is still in bed and is dead," replied the robot, stamping its foot again. "I assume you mean he's sleeping like the dead?" said Holmes, thinking the metallic fellow had expressed himself ambiguously. "Negative, he is most definitely dead," insisted the robot, his smile vanishing. "But to determine a person's death, you need a medical app," Dr. Watson pointed out. "Do you have one?" "Negative. Even a medical layman among humans can recognize death when faced with decapitation." Hardwell justified himself. "Do I understand you correctly?" Holmes probed. "He was decapitated?" "Yes, come with me if you don't believe me," Hardwell demanded, turning abruptly and stomping noisily through a colonnade that appeared to be carved from white marble. Holmes, flanked by Elmer and Dr. Watson, followed him intently, sensing that this case awaited his investigation. He felt lost in the great hall. Moreover, there was a constant hammering sound, as if someone were striking an anvil with a hammer. "There would be enough room here for a dance," remarked Dr. Watson. "Only the music is missing, and the hammering is rather disruptive." "Watson, a person has died and you're thinking about dancing," Holmes criticised him. Hardwell led them up a wide staircase to the side, its polished stainless steel banister feeling ice cold to the touch. The doctor quickly withdrew his hand, fearing it might otherwise freeze to the metal. At the top of the stairs, Hardwell turned left and walked a few steps along the corridor until he stopped at an open door. Dr. Watson pushed past him and after a brief examination declared, "Yes, the man is definitely dead, and has been for at least a day, as he's ice cold, like the banister, and rigor mortis has already subsided." "Precisely," Hardwell praised. "He was still alive yesterday." When Holmes also entered the 20-square-metre room, a horrific sight met his eyes. On the bed lay a headless male corpse with a bare torso. The rest was covered by a bedsheet. Oddly enough, there was hardly any blood to be seen. Posters of earthly landscapes were stuck to the walls. One showed a forest, another a desert with a cactus. Against the wall stood a table with a chair and a shelf containing several bottles apparently filled with spirits and empty drinking glasses, some of which bore traces of lipstick. "His head was stolen. We robots can swap heads, but that's not possible with humans. Everyone here in the factory knows that," reported Hardwell. "That was clearly murder. Even if I weren't a doctor, I could determine that," said Dr. Watson. But why is there so little blood to be seen here? He was possibly killed elsewhere and his torso brought here, Holmes surmised. Negative, Hardwell chimed in again. If you look at the wound on the neck, you'll notice it was treated with a laser, the abbreviation for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, which carefully sealed the blood vessels when used. A robot couldn't have done this? Holmes inquired. Is the sky blue on Earth? Hardwell posed a counter-question. Not always. Robots cannot be programmed to murder. That still complies with Isaac Asimov's laws, Elmer explained. And Hardwell specified, a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. That's very interesting indeed, Holmes agreed, though it clearly didn't help this poor chap here. Who was the last person in his room? Privacy regulations prevent us from monitoring our residents' activities, Hardwell admitted. However, I can make some assumptions. Very good, Holmes said with delight. And what do you suspect then, my dear metallic friend? I suspect the last visitor was female. And are there any female beings here? Dr. Watson wanted to know. Of course! The robot's voice now sounded almost offended. It would help if you told us more, urged Holmes, who was already showing signs of impatience, though this seemed to fall on deaf ears with Hardwell. Elmer knew what to do. You can increase his talkativeness by loosening his storytelling circuit. All you need to do is pull out the thin red wire at the back of his neck a bit. Carefully, Holmes used 2 fingers of his right hand to grasp the aforementioned red wire at Hardwell's nape and pulled it out into a loop about 2 centimetres long. It's like Sodom and Gomorrah in here. The male and female cyberneticists keep engaging in sexual relations with each other, even though that's not mentioned anywhere in their employment contracts. We robots don't do such things. Hardwell now prattled on cheerfully. The now sadly deceased cyberneticist Skirton had affairs with Walliander, Porphylia and Mechalinda. They were practically passing the door handle between them, coming and going as they pleased, and— Stop, stop, stop! Dr. Watson interrupted him with a defensive gesture. That's a bit too much indiscretion, Hardwell. No, no, Holmes contradicted him vehemently. Do let him speak. I'm burning with interest to hear all the details. But my dear Holmes, we surely don't want to learn anything about the sexual habits of the local society. Unless they lead us to the murderer, my dear Watson. A luxurious lifestyle with low moral standards usually leads to murder and manslaughter. I rather suspect jealousy played a part in this. Negative, Hardwell interjected again. Such old-fashioned human emotions don't exist here. There's nothing but debauchery on a sexual basis. After work, before work, even often during work, the male and female staff members readily engage in intimate relationships that are extremely short-lived. We robots don't do such things. Yes, we've already understood that, Dr. Watson interrupted him. What we want to know is which of the remaining staff members from this distinguished workforce would be capable of such a crime. Everyone, replied Hardwell. For human nature remains archaic and brutal despite technological progress. We robots are not like that. But if everyone here is as archaic as you claim, dear Hardwell, then surely the archaic feeling of jealousy must exist as well. Holmes now stamped his foot, determined to be proven right in this matter. Negative, Hardwell insisted. Jealousy would require love, but the people here don't love each other at all. They often treat each other in a rather cold-hearted and insolent manner. We robots don't do such things. The metal man is getting on my nerves, Dr. Watson chimed in again. I'm starting to believe that robots are the better humans. What's really wearing me down is the incessant hammering, remarked Holmes. Hardwell explained. The hammering is used to test the impact resistance of the metal from which robot parts are manufactured here. My 100,000-kilometre service will now have to be carried out by another cyberneticist, Elmer chimed in. Yes, since Skirton won't be able to perform it anymore. Holmes remarked with subtle sarcasm. Hardwell put his smile back on. Skirton was an excellent and competent worker, but he had absolutely nothing to do with robot maintenance. What's that supposed to mean now? Asked Holmes. That he always delegated the work he was supposed to do to others. He brought pleasure to his female colleagues, which is why they did his work for him. That's very enlightening, remarked Dr. Watson. So this chap had women doing his work after he'd given them pleasure, and you didn't report this depraved behaviour, Hardwell? That's not what I'm programmed for, he defended himself and stamped his foot again. I only do what I'm programmed to do, and Skirton only did what gave him great pleasure. Well, the fun is definitely over for him now, Holmes stated, putting on a distinguished expression. Let's determine who so casually twisted, lasered off his head. At that moment, a black-haired woman in an azure blue jumpsuit appeared. Her light blue eyes practically glowed in her delicate face. What's going on here? Holmes stepped out of the room and blocked her entrance. Young lady, spare yourself the dreadful sight of a corpse. Skur is dead? She asked, turning pale. This is Porphylia, Hardwell introduced her. She was meant to do Skirton's work today, after he'd given her an orgasm. Porphylia, this is Elmer, who requires your services. You can now proceed without going through Skirton. How dare you, Hardwell? She snapped at him angrily. Who gave you permission to discuss our arrangement with strangers, especially with such odd characters as these two? Meanwhile, Dr. Watson had also come out of the room and said indignantly, If anything, I find your unchaste arrangements rather peculiar. Have you no shame at all, young lady? Which century did you two comedians blow in from? She asked, placing her hands on her hips. From the 19th, Holmes replied truthfully. But I rather think murder is still a punishable offence nowadays, wouldn't you agree? Oh, she turned pale again. Skur was murdered? Yes, or do you think he unscrewed his head like a robot? Hardwell mocked her. He has no head anymore? She asked, perplexed. Yes, it was removed with a laser. Skirton can no longer pleasure you, Hardwell added unnecessarily. You'll have to find another cyberneticist for your sexual... With a grip to his neck, she spontaneously ended his chattiness and turned back to Holmes. It wasn't me. But you didn't love him, he reproached her. A love is merely hormonal poisoning of the cerebral cortex, she stated dryly, and I don't suffer from that. Yes, but some people rather enjoy suffering from it, Dr. Watson stated. Come with me, Elmer, she commanded and led the way. Stop! Stay here! Holmes called after her, but she had already disappeared around the corner of the corridor with Ultimo One's main robot. We must question the other two ladies, Holmes suggested. Hardwell, lock up Skirton's room and take us to one of the other two suspects. As requested, I will also lower the temperature in the room so he doesn't cause any unpleasant odours. The robot locked the door to the dead man's room, tapped a bit more on the display beside it, and trotted obediently down the stairs. Holmes walked close behind him and pulled out the red wire a bit further. I'll take you to Mechalinda now, Hardwell began chatting willingly again. She's currently in the dining room having her diet meal, minced octopus tentacles in algae sauce. Sounds unappetizing, remarked Dr. Watson. Do you know when Lady Mechalinda last visited the Headless Cyberneticist, Hardwell? Holmes inquired. Yesterday morning from 8 to 8:51, he reported. And would it have been possible that she snuck back to him afterwards in such a way that you might have missed it? Absolutely not. Nothing escapes my notice. We should inquire with Elmer whether it can be deactivated with a different wire, Holmes said to Dr. Watson, who nodded in agreement. In the dining hall, there were several octagonal tables where scattered individuals, predominantly male, sat in overalls of various shades of blue, eating from glass plates. They all wore mournful expressions, as if they already knew what had happened to their colleague, or perhaps because they weren't enjoying their meal. Hardwell made his way towards the only female, a blonde, who was stirring a thick green sauce containing white fluorescent pieces with her spoon. Upon the robot's arrival, she stopped stirring and gazed in amazement, alternating between Holmes and Dr. Watson. "These are two men from the Ultimo 1 crew. Your sexual partner Skirton is dead, and they want to question you about it, Mechalinda," Hardwell explained to her. Holmes bowed slightly before her and introduced himself. "My name is Sherlock Holmes. I work as a detective at all times, and had actually wanted to inform you about the passing of your lover in a more considerate manner." "Oh," she said, gesturing at Dr. Watson with her spoon. "And who's the other chap with the moustache?" "My name is Dr. John Watson. Delighted to make your acquaintance, Lady Mechalinda, even under such tragic circumstances. Do you require medical assistance?" "Why, do I look ill?" She let the spoon fall onto the glass plate with a clatter. "No, but it is generally customary for ladies to promptly faint upon receiving news of a loved one's death." He, she giggled. "Whatever are you on about? The only time I faint is when I'm under anaesthetic." "You seem to be taking the news of death rather calmly," Holmes observed. "Apparently, you don't yet know that he was beheaded." "Oh," she said again, and reached for the spoon. "And do you have any suspicions yet, Detective?" "Naturally, initial suspicion always falls upon those closest to the murdered person," he explained to her. "When did you last see Mr. Skirton alive?" "Well, yesterday morning," she admitted, and began spooning the green mush into her mouth, occasionally making slobbering noises and dribbling spots onto her light blue overalls. Indignantly, she observed Dr. Watson before he asked, "Do you not feel any remorse at all for your friend?" "I wouldn't call Skur a friend, more of a convenient acquaintance, if you know what I mean." She put her spoon aside, although her plate was still half full. "We have already learned how things work around here," Holmes remarked with half-closed eyelids. "It's not our task to pass judgment on your dissolute lifestyle either. We simply want to find out who might have had a reason to decapitate the man so casually." "No idea!" She shook her head, making her blonde hair move, its waves reflecting the light from the ceiling lamp. "I could imagine he upset one of us girls somehow. He. "I don't find that funny at all, young lady," Dr. Watson scolded her. "As we discovered, a so-called laser was used to dispatch him. Do you possess one?" "No," she said quickly. "But there's one in the service room that's freely available. It's normally used for cutting metal on robots. As far as I know, no one has used it to cut up people before." "And who do you think is capable of such a dreadful deed?" Holmes inquired, his eyes now open. "Pretty much anyone, but especially Walliander. She can be so—" She seemed to search for the right word and finally found it after 30 seconds. "Impulsive!" "Yes, although during such impulsive outbursts she's hardly likely to be carrying a laser with her. Am I right?" Holmes pressed further. "How should I know? She's so... Again she searched for the right expression. "Bonkers!" "Then we shall not disturb your delicate dinner any longer," Holmes announced, "and will pay a visit to the lady." "Do that," she encouraged him. "She was last seen in the fitness room. Hardwell, escort these two old-fashioned chaps there." "Righto! Follow me, old-fashioned chaps!" Hardwell beckoned, already stomping ahead. "What do you make of these modern ladies?" Dr. Watson whispered a question to his friend. "I won't presume to judge the customs and manners here, but I'm grateful to live in an entirely different time, which I'm already beginning to miss," he replied. "Yes, especially after food I'm familiar with. That stuff on the plate looked absolutely revolting," said Dr. Watson as he pulled out his lolly to have a little nibble on it. Holmes nodded and addressed the robot in front of him once again. "What is a fitness room, Hardwell?" "A room for physical exercise. Every human muscle group can be engaged within it." "People used to do that while working," remarked Dr. Watson. In the spacious gym, several unfamiliar pieces of equipment stood ready for the English gentleman. An exercise bike, a treadmill, a cross-trainer, a multi-gym and a rowing machine. Walliander, a tall, sturdy woman with copper-coloured curly hair, stood barefoot in a floral dress in front of the treadmill, apparently contemplating whether to step onto it. "Here are two gentlemen from the spaceship Ultimo 1 who wish to speak with you," Hardwell intervened, making the decision for her. Who have you made yourself so pretty for, Lady Walliander? Holmes permitted himself to ask, glancing at her floral dress. Well, certainly not for you, she said tartly, and gazed at Dr. Watson with her bedroom eyes. But for you, perhaps. Thank you for the compliment, said the doctor. However, we are not here to exchange pleasantries with you, Lady Walliander, but rather to bring you some sad news. Yes, I've already heard about it. Porphylia told me straight away through the intercom that our skirton has been decapitated. Let me tell you right now, I didn't do it. And you always exercise your muscle groups in such a lovely dress here? Holmes probed. Yes, because spaceship crews and their robots are constantly passing through here, she explained, running both hands over her hips. She smelled of lavender. And I presume you'd like to be whisked away by one of the men from these crews, Dr. Watson conjectured. You've got it, she praised him, briefly running her tongue across her crimson lips. I miss the wind blowing through my hair and the green grass I can run on. This treadmill here is but a poor substitute for movement in the great outdoors. So why did you sign up to come here in the first place? Hardwell interjected into the questioning. Don't ask such stupid questions, she scolded him. For the money, of course, but I've already saved up quite a bit and I'm just waiting for the right one. And perhaps Mr. Skirton stood in the way of your plan, Holmes surmised. No, not at all. He couldn't care less if one fewer person came to visit him. Why don't you go and bother Matzewinger instead? Who is that? After all, Holmes couldn't know him. Hardwell started reporting again. Matzewinger is a 6'6" foul-smelling cybernetics expert with a black full beard who handles the difficult repair cases here. He last spoke to Skirton yesterday between 9 and 9:25 in the morning. Could you hear what the two of them were talking about? Holmes wanted to know. No, they were in the soundproof relaxation pod. Ah, soundproof. That would truly be a relief for one's ears, Dr. Watson enthused. All this hammering is really bothersome and could drive one mad. Perhaps you've found the motive for this heinous murder, interjected Holmes, raising his index finger and then turning to Hardwell. Take us to this foul-smelling Mr. Matzewinger. Gladly, but I haven't noticed any madness amongst the people here. Humans get used to everything, even constant background noise, said Hardwell, obediently setting off again, and Holmes and Dr. Watson nodded goodbye to the alluring Walliander, who was now stepping onto the treadmill after all. Did you notice it too, Watson? Holmes whispered to him. That lady was wearing the same shade of lipstick as the one on the glasses in our murder victim's room. No, I hadn't noticed that, he admitted. But that's not proof that she did it, although she would have the necessary physical strength. When the victim is asleep, it doesn't take much strength to decapitate them. Just think of the story of Judith and Holofernes, Holmes reminded him. Hardwell had arrived at a cloister with a glass roof, in whose courtyard there was an open-topped aquarium. Several 8-armed octopi were drifting about in the water, which was eerily illuminated by white jellyfish. The entire structure appeared to be some sort of viewing platform, as through the glass roof one could see the reddish-appearing sun above the water's surface. Marvellous, declared Dr. Watson. My eyes have never beheld anything quite like this. We haven't come here to delight in this alien beauty, my friend, Holmes cautioned him, but rather to find a murderer, be it male or female. I cannot go any further here, Hardwell revealed to them. Besides the sounds from the metalwork, my authority is also limited here. Go along the corridor around the corner through a large padded door. There you will find Matzewinger. Before we go, one more question, Holmes interjected. Did this Matzewinger also have affairs with the three ladies? Yes, but not as frequently and not for as long, replied the robot. It varies with humans. Some have stamina, others don't. We've really come to something, remarked Dr. Watson. Now we're having to be lectured about human nature by a robot. Well, I find his talkativeness quite amusing. Holmes grinned, quickly becoming serious again and setting off. Come along. I sense that we're approaching the solution to a macabre puzzle step by step. Dr. Watson followed him and whispered, "Now we're completely alone in a strange world. I'm getting quite uneasy. You must force yourself to focus on the case, Watson. Our surroundings mustn't gain influence over us or distract us from what's essential. Simply imagine we're in a castle, or rather, in the water-flooded tunnel beneath a castle." The hammering could only be heard in the distance as they both stood before the promised padded door. Holmes boldly pressed the handle and entered a 50-square-metre room of complete silence. The silence was so loud that they could only hear their own breathing. Along the cream-padded walls, mounted deer heads protruded at wide intervals, whilst the floor consisted of a soft, moss-green plush carpet that muffled every step. At the far end, a black-bearded man sat cross-legged in cobalt-blue overalls. His bare feet gave off a cheesy odour. With alert brown eyes, he watched his visitors approach. "I apologise for the intrusion, Mr. Matzewinger. My name is—" "Mere smoke and mirrors," the bearded man interrupted Holmes quickly and laughed. The laughter filled the silence in an unsettling way. "When you're finished, we would like to speak with you about Mr. Skirton's gruesome death." Dr. Watson addressed him. Matzewinger rose, towering a full head taller than the two Englishmen, and scratched his forehead, which was almost completely overgrown with hair. "Well, well, old Skurs bid his final farewell. Can't say I'm shedding many tears over that." "Would you have preferred to see him dead rather than alive?" Holmes probed, glancing sideways and upwards to avoid having to lift his head in order to meet the bearded man's eyes. "I would have preferred not to see him at all. He should have received his salary in a gift-wrapped package," Matzewinger said irritably. "But the money is invisible, if I understand correctly," the detective recalled. "And it's called Bitcoin." "His performance was just as invisible," Matzewinger retorted sharply. "And that's called laziness. He didn't do anything at all. He had his sweethearts do everything for him." "And that made you jealous," Holmes concluded with a satisfied expression, as he had seen this as the motive for the murder right from the start. "No, it made me absolutely livid," Matzewinger clarified, striking his palm with his fist. "Such a fraud simply didn't belong here. That's why I've already sent several complaints to management, but I haven't received any response yet. Oh yes, out of 10 complaints, barely one succeeds." "And which one, if I may ask?" Dr. Watson wanted to know. "The one about the lousy catering here. I'm the only one in the entire service station who gets their provisions in tablet form," he said proudly, pulling a blister pack of green pills from a breast pocket of his overalls. "Here, they're called Algeron. Would you like to try one?" "No, thank you," Holmes declined. "We're not hungry, except for success. We want to catch the murderer." "Oh, it was murder, was it? Well, he could hardly have died from overwork. But when it comes to murder, you've come to the wrong person," said the bearded man, putting his pills away. "Well, at least that good-for-nothing has been dealt with." "So you didn't like him then?" summarised Dr. Watson. "About as much as a boil on my leg." "Well, removing a sore on your leg isn't forbidden, but removing a good-for-nothing certainly is," Holmes stated. "How did Skirton meet his end?" Matzewinger asked after a brief pause, his curiosity seemingly getting the better of him. "He lost a vital organ necessary for survival," revealed Dr. Watson. "If I had to guess who snuffed out his life, I'd wager it was one of our three Graces. My money's on Porphylia. Looks like a fragile doll, but she's hard as steel. You'd do well not to underestimate her." Suddenly, the chirping of a cricket could be heard. "I say," asked Dr. Watson, "are there insects here?" The bearded man shook his head. "That's just the signal that break time is over. However, I shall stay to celebrate this memorable day." "Do you work with lasers often?" inquired Holmes. "Not much. I focus more on the precision work with the sensors for the robots. Walliander is the specialist when it comes to the bodywork of these tin men." "So she uses the laser more frequently?" Holmes probed further. "Exactly. Why are you asking me that?" "You won't believe it, but someone used it to cut off Mr. Skirton's head." Dr. Watson now enlightened him fully. "Ha ha ha!" Matzewinger roared with laughter. How original! You've made my day. The delicate hand that shortened that fraud by a head shall be kissed by me. I find that to be rather tasteless, Holmes objected. Whoever the murderess may be, she certainly doesn't deserve a kiss on the hand. The bearded man burst out laughing again and sank back down to the floor. He was still laughing as both gentlemen left the room. An unpleasant fellow, Watson said indignantly. And what's more, he's got smelly feet. But I consider him honest, Holmes pointed out. He didn't even attempt to put on an act for us. Nor did he give himself away with any word. My instinct tells me he's innocent. We should now examine the laser more closely. We might find some traces of the person who last used it. Hardwell was still standing in the spot where they had left him. Together, they made their way to the service room where the laser was located. In the 100-square-metre room, which they called the service room, things looked rather untidy. Various robot arms and other limbs of the metal men were scattered across the floor. Consoles protruded from the walls with wires occasionally dangling from them, and between these were tables with monitors on top and chairs in front. At present, there were no people inside, only a few seemingly deactivated robots standing about. It looks like a junk room in here, Holmes complained. Hello, is anybody here? One of the bronze robots began to move and approached the humans, and Hardwell menacingly. Standing at 6 feet 3 inches tall, he appeared quite intimidating. His face was formed by a mask, similar to those worn by gladiators of old. However, in the eye holes there were no eyes, only empty sockets that looked pitch black. With each step he took, sparks flew from his knee joints. "Stop!" shouted Hardwell. But the robot continued towards Holmes with clanking steps. "An intruder!" he called out in a metallic voice. "Back off!" Hardwell sharply commanded him. "Kill strangers!" bellowed the robot from its metallic throat. "We'd better withdraw, Holmes," advised Dr. Watson. "This mechanism appears to have taken a dislike to us. I have no intention of retreating from a soulless machine. Hardwell will surely fend it off." Holmes turned to him confidently. "Negative," he admitted. "I'm afraid I'm not a combat robot." The bronze robot drew ever closer, its arms ending in large pincers that could easily have crushed a person's throat at the larynx. These pincers kept clattering open and shut, seemingly eager to get human flesh between them. "The sinister fellow seems to mean business," feared Dr. Watson, "and he doesn't know those laws by Isaac Asimov. Therefore I suggest we flee, gentlemen," said Hardwell meekly, "and rather quickly." "Very well," Holmes agreed, and hurried out of the service room with Dr. Watson. "One shouldn't tempt fate." But the robot continued to follow them, not very fast, but steadily nonetheless. It came clattering after them with rattling pincers. "The tin fellow makes me nervous," remarked Dr. Watson. "The clattering of his pincers reminds me of castanets, though I'm quite certain he's not inviting us to dance." "If only our good friend Elmer were back with us," Holmes fervently hoped. "We must find him, or somehow manage to lock up this murderous robot somewhere." Hardwell had followed all of them and called out to Holmes, who was at the front of the pursued group, from behind. "Turn right at the corner, Mr. Holmes. From there you'll get to the kitchen." Holmes followed the advice, with Dr. Watson close behind him, and the bronze robot likewise. It seemed like a procession of the lost to some undefined occasion. In the kitchen, several small robots stood at a large stone table, chopping octopus tentacles into bite-sized pieces with kitchen cleavers. The doctor quickly snatched one of the cleavers, which he was easily able to take from the metallic hand of one of the kitchen robots. "Now we have an effective weapon," he boasted, already drawing back for a throw. As the rebellious robot crossed the kitchen threshold, the cleaver hit him right in the middle of his bronze head, but bounced off. Nevertheless, the momentum made the robot stagger and fall backwards. Afterwards, he made several unsuccessful attempts to get back up. Hardwell responded and unscrewed his head. "Right then, gentlemen," he announced triumphantly. "The rogue robot has been deactivated. I wonder who illegally programmed it to kill." "I have a suspicion about that," Holmes replied. "Let's return to the service room. Done and dusted. This time, All the robots remained motionless as the visitors returned. "Where is this laser now?" asked Holmes, unimpressed by the previous attack. Hardwell led the way and stopped in front of a table where a pistol-like device stood, its barrel tapering towards the front so that only a thin beam could escape from it. "Here you can see the high-performance laser, which is capable of delivering 3,000 pulses per second. It has an average output of—" Hold on, Dr. Watson interrupted him. "We're not looking to buy it, so there's no need to sing its praises. Is it the only device of its kind?" "Yes, it has never failed so far." Holmes had already examined it closely and exclaimed enthusiastically, "There! Look, Watson!" "What am I supposed to see, Holmes?" "Here on the tap hangs a copper-red hair." Holmes removed it with 2 pointed fingers and showed it to the doctor. "I wonder whom it belongs to. I rather think we already know." A short while later, all 3 of them found themselves back in Walliander's fitness room, where she stepped off the treadmill upon their arrival and wiped several beads of sweat from her high forehead with the back of her hand. "You again?" she asked, visibly bored. "Yes, forgive us for having to disturb you again." Holmes apologised and presented her with the found hair. "But we discovered this on the laser that was used to behead poor Mr. Skirton. And have you found his head yet?" "I assume it's already been thrown to the Kraken as fodder," replied Holmes. "I rather doubt it's lying on a silver platter, like the head of John the Baptist after Salome danced for Herod. So, what do you have to confess to us?" "Attention!" Hardwell interjected, unsolicited. "I advise you not to confess anything without a lawyer. Walliander?" "Shut up, you tin fool," she scolded him. "Why so unfriendly?" Holmes wanted to know from her. "He only gave you valuable advice." "Tsk! Do you really think I'm so terribly stupid that I'd overlook one of my hairs in the device?" she bristled, running her fingers vigorously through her curly hair. "Especially since I always wear a plastic cap when I work with it." "A plastic cap?" repeated Dr. Watson uncomprehendingly. Demonstratively, she pulled out a white cap from a side pocket of her floral dress and put it over her head, so that all her copper-coloured curls disappeared beneath it. "What do you say to that?" "My great-aunt Melinda used to wear a similar nightcap," the doctor admitted to her, "though it was made from a different material." "Most clever. So you believe, Lady Walliander, that someone deliberately placed this hair here to mislead us," deduced Holmes, razor-sharp as ever. "Bravo! You've got it, sir. For someone who came from the past, you're quite decent at thinking. Thank you for the recognition, Lady Walliander, but mental work has nothing to do with one's place of origin. It is rather the cooperation of brain cells that promotes logical thinking ability. However, my friend Dr. Watson can explain this to you much better." "I'll pass on any medical lectures," she declined. "You'll both be very interested to know that we ladies all share the same bathroom." "Aha!" burst out Dr. Watson. "Of course there's also a hairbrush there for all the ladies." "Wrong," she snapped at him. "Of course we each have our own hairbrush. What I was trying to suggest is—" Holmes interrupted her and finished her sentence. "That one of the other 2 Graces might have used your brush, stealing one of your beautiful hairs from it and attaching it to the laser." "Quite right," she agreed. "And I think you'll find it rather difficult to determine which one it was." "Then you don't know Sherlock Holmes very well," Dr. Watson blurted out. "Knowing him as I do, he's already got a plan for that." "Indeed it is, but this plan requires absolute secrecy on your part, Lady Walliander," Holmes whispered to her conspiratorially. "I can keep quiet as the grave, but Hardwell seems rather talkative lately, if you ask me." "Can we silence him without drawing attention?" inquired Dr. Watson. "Of course, you could cut his red wire. That would leave him speechless, though it would rather stand out," she informed them. "And what if we temporarily put him out of action?" Holmes suggested. "Negative," Hardwell protested. "I'm indispensable here." "Tsk! He suffers from an inflated ego," Walliander criticised. "Let's do it like this." She whispered the rest of the sentence into Holmes's ear. "I can't hear anything," the robot complained. "That's an excellent idea." Holmes seemed to agree with the copper-haired lady's suggestion. "I'm afraid I didn't hear anything either," reported Dr. Watson. "Dr. Watson," said Holmes, giving his friend a friendly pat on the shoulder. "You were absolutely keen on having a tour from our dear Hardwell." "Me? Oh yes, of course. Hardwell, would you be so kind as to show me around this marvellous estate?" "With pleasure. Please follow me, Dr. Watson." The robot hurried ahead with the doctor in tow. Holmes winked conspiratorially at Walliander. "Right then, I shall now quietly interrogate the other two ladies again, and you promise me not to warn either of them." "As if I would be that stupid," she spat, "when one of those two vipers tried to drag me into this mess. I'm going to do some rowing now for my toned upper arms." Holmes watched as she seated herself in a rowing machine, then set off to find one of the two suspects. Having previously covered several routes in the extensive construction and being reasonably familiar with it, he now strode in the direction of the dining hall. Secretly, he suspected that Meccalinda had already finished her less than delightful meal, though he didn't know how long the menu sequence was. It was quite possible that she was still present and on her second dessert. Unfortunately, this suspicion proved incorrect. The dining hall was utterly empty, so he set off on the off chance of finding her at work, even though he wasn't quite sure what her work actually entailed. Chance took the lead, and he caught up with her in a room filled with unfamiliar machines. These strange devices resembled four-legged tables, though the tabletop was recessed and covered with glass. Inside gleamed images of hilly landscapes, along whose paths a silver ball danced about. Meccalinda stood at one side of such a table, turning and pulling lever-like protrusions, which occasionally produced bell-like sounds. "Bloody hell," she cursed. "Get in the hole, you bastard." "What lovely thing are you doing there?" Holmes inquired, peering over her shoulder. "Oh, now you show up as well. I'm playing on a pinball machine. The aim is to shoot the ball into that hole over there," she explained. "Rather like golf," Holmes deduced. "Similar, yet completely different. What do you want from me again? I'm not a murderer." "Yes, that's what the other two ladies say as well. I just wonder which one I shouldn't believe. What do you think, Lady Meccalinda?" "I believe you shouldn't waste your precious time with me, especially not during my break." "Well, I must confess to you, I haven't made any progress whatsoever. Would you be so kind as to help me?" "Gladly," she agreed. "And how shall I do that?" "What would you advise me to do?" he asked her, feigning ignorance. "If I were you, I'd find out who inherits from the deceased," she suggested, "because it certainly isn't me." "Do you know who it is?" "No, but if you inquire at the office downstairs, the accounting robot will tell you." "That's an excellent idea. Thank you very much, young lady." He said goodbye and followed her advice by going downstairs, having to admit to himself that he hadn't even thought about the dead man's inheritance yet. On his way to said office, he encountered Elmer with Porphylia. Elmer reported straight away. "My service is finished. We can go back up." "Steady on. I won't go back up until I've solved this treacherous murder," Holmes replied. "Have you examined the murder weapon yet?" asked Porphylia, piercing the detective with her burning gaze. "Yes, but unfortunately I found nothing incriminating about it," Holmes lied. "No?" Porphylia seemed puzzled. "Did you look very carefully?" "Yes, even Hardwell had a look with his glowing red eyes and found nothing either." She murmured, appearing deep in thought. "I could imagine that this robot cleaned the laser." "Oh, cleaned? From what?" The detective feigned ignorance and smiled at her amiably. "From the heart." She stopped abruptly, instinctively covering her mouth, for she had let something slip. "Aha!" Holmes exclaimed gleefully, pointing his finger at her. "So it was you who stole Lady Walliander's hair from her brush and attached it to that laser. And I bet you were also the one who set the bronze robot upon us." Quick as a flash, she turned and took flight immediately. As if the devil himself were after her, or merely the tax investigation officers, she ran away. Holmes chased after her, but had to give up after a bend that led to a larger square from which 3 corridors radiated outwards. Elmer had followed close on his heels and now stood behind him. "May I be of any assistance, Mr. Holmes?" he asked politely. "Yes, if you could tell me which of these passages our perpetrator ran into, that would be most helpful." Elmer bent down, his head almost touching the ground, before announcing, "My olfactory sensors indicate that Porphylia took the left path upwards." Both hurried as fast as Holmes could manage, Elmer perfectly matching his pace, through the passage in question, which led after a few meters to a round steel door that looked like a massive vault door. A bit of seawater was dripping from its lower edge, forming a small puddle. "What's the story behind this rounded door?" Holmes inquired of Elmer. "It's a torpedo tube, as this facility was once intended for defence. There aren't any torpedoes here anymore, but the tubes still lead to the outside." "Does that mean Lady Porphylia could have escaped through there and might now resurface?" "She may have escaped, but I reckon she won't be able to surface alive from a depth of 5,900 meters. Come with me to a window, perhaps we can see her," said Elmer, leading the way back to the junction until they reached a large observation window looking out to sea. "Indeed, there she floats like a mermaid," Holmes noted perplexedly. The raven-haired Porphylia in her azure blue overalls floated slowly upwards, her strands of hair undulating in the water. Her delicate face seemed to mourn. The glow in her light blue eyes had faded, and her mouth was slightly open. A scene of beauty, yet also of great tragedy. Suddenly, Dr. Watson appeared with Hardwell beside the two of them, and also stared through the window. "She passed judgment on herself," Holmes revealed to him. "Such a shame," Hardwell lamented. "She was a very skilled cyberneticist." "And a very beautiful woman," Dr. Watson added. "But sadly, she did not possess a beautiful soul." There was a strange form of parting sorrow that Holmes and Dr. Watson felt as they climbed back into the diving sphere with Elmer to be pushed up to the surface, where the Ultimo One was already waiting to receive them. "I'm sorry that we found such depths of human depravity in a place of such particular beauty." Dr. Watson revealed his thoughts. "I'm sad too," admitted Elmer. "At my request, Porphylia embedded certain human emotions in me to make my work easier. One person in particular will be especially sad," Holmes chimed in. "Who do you mean?" inquired Dr. Watson. "Our bearded friend named Matzewinger. Do you remember when he announced he wanted to kiss the delicate hand of the murderess?" "Yes, and I also remember how tasteless you found that, dear Holmes." "Quite right, but a man with sweaty feet seems to have rather different taste than we do, my dear Watson." You are listening to Pomej, the Headless Cyberneticist on K2-18B, Sherlock Holmes, the Galactic Cases, Episode 4, based on the characters created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A goaudio production